There's something really special about action photography. Seeing dogs running, leaping a log, playing with their friends, splashing in the water. It really captures our dogs, I think, in a way that portrait photography can't. And don't get me wrong, I will always be a portrait photographer. That is my love, creating something magical in a mossy forest where a dog is looking whimsically into the distance. That is my whole deal. And I'm not gonna be shy about that. That's what I do. But I know as well that a lot of you guys and clients as well really love photos of dogs in action. Whether that is action that you have set up, running a dog along a trail, jumping a dog over a little log, or if it's something a bit more candid like dogs at a dog park or dogs frolicking on the beach. Or maybe it's getting into agility photography or disc dog competitions or duck diving. There is a heap of different ways that you can take action photography, but we all know that it is definitely not the easiest genre of photography going around. So I thought to celebrate Chris van Riel, who is a friend of mine and an amazing action photographer, coming into Inspawration Photography throughout 2024 to do a series of 6 webinars directly through my website.
Dat was bijna echt. Ze hadden echt gewoon perfect door het midden heen.
I would give you guys a little bit of a lowdown on some action tips and tricks that he's told me to share with you guys. He is definitely the expert in this department, though I do take my share of action photos too. But these are the main tips, with Chris's number 1 tip. When I said, hey Chris, what can I tell people is your most important piece of advice when it comes to taking action photos? Of course, I've got to leave that to the end, so you're going to have to watch the rest of the tips first, but don't worry, they're all going to be super useful and hopefully help you guys capture more photos of dogs in action, get them more in focus more often. And look, this is not a quick fix. This is going to be a little YouTube video with some tips and advice. There is so much detail and nuance and technical things around the settings, and the minute that I get Chris started on the technicality of what your camera is doing behind the scenes when you're taking action photos, you see this guy's eyes light up. There is so much going on inside your camera, particularly with dogs running towards you, that he just loves the intricacies of all this stuff. So don't be discouraged if you watch this little YouTube video today and you get out there and you practice and you find that your photos still aren't all in focus. I'm gonna let you in on a secret. Even though I know what I'm doing, I have decent kit. I have a professional level camera, the Sony a7 III. It is not a sport camera, but it's a decent camera, right? I have the Sony 135 1.8 GM lens, which is one of their fastest lenses. If I'm doing photos of dogs running toward the camera, I am lucky if I get 1, maybe 2 photos per run in focus. Maybe I need to do 3 or 4 runs toward me to get that 1 photo in focus. Just remember that at the end of the day, all you need is that 1 photo, that 1 perfect moment. Everything's sharp, or at least the eyes are sharp. You don't need the whole body sharp, but the eyes are sharp. You've got your 1 photo. We don't need 50 photos of the dog doing the same thing, but please don't be discouraged if you get out there and try and you're still struggling. That's why I'm running these webinars. There's also an option for feedback to get personal assistance from Chris, troubleshooting, get another pair of eyes on your work. But let's see if we can give you some advice so you can get out there and hopefully up your success rate a little bit anyways. Tip number 1 is gear. I've already mentioned the importance of gear and how Chris loves to nerd out about this stuff, but there is no denying that some cameras and lenses are going to outperform others, particularly when it comes to action photography where the dog is running towards you. Dogs are small, they're erratic, they kind of move up and down. There's really nothing like action photos of dogs in the rest of the photography world. Kids playing soccer tend to just run on the same plane. They don't move all around and up and down. Horses are big, cars are big. There's really, if you look at anything that is giving you camera reviews, it's like, this is great for sport photography, just remember that it's highly likely that it's talking about kids playing soccer or adults playing basketball, not dogs running very, very quickly and erratically, okay? If you are serious about getting into action photography with dogs, whether that's disc dog, agility, whatever it is, if you're serious and you want to invest in this as your craft, it would be a good idea to look at a sports-specific camera. One that is like, I am built for a sport. For Sony, that's the A9 series. I don't really know much about other brands, but I'm pretty sure if you looked for like best Nikon for sport, you would be able to find which one that is. Portrait cameras can deal. Mine can do okay, like I said, but really the hit rate, the consistency is not there. You look at the hit rate of Chris's A9 and you can just see that his just craps all over mine, let's say. You know, he's going to have a much, much higher success rate, much more consistency, a lot more photos to choose from, and a lot more that are focused where they need to be. So don't underestimate your gear, your camera, and your lens. That doesn't mean it has to have the fastest frames per second in the universe, because spraying and praying, just shooting as many photos as you possibly can in a burst is potentially actually doing it a disservice and is not going to up your hit rate. So something Chris is going to cover in his webinar. I do think you need it on a burst mode, but definitely not firing off 50,000 photos per run. That is not actually going to help you. It's probably going to hinder you because the camera then really has to struggle to keep up. The lens as well, obviously, if you're using a kit lens or a lower quality lens, 50mm little cheap thing, it's probably going to really, really struggle with capturing dogs in action in focus. So don't underestimate your gear. Tip number 2 is settings. Obviously, your settings are going to play a big part in getting your photos in focus and looking how you want them to look. A fast shutter speed is a must. I would recommend a shutter speed of over 1/1250th of a second. Faster is better, but does not guarantee that those photos are going to be in focus. Don't put it up to 1/8000th of a second and then assume that that'll solve your focus issues. It would solve any motion blur issues, but honestly, I don't think dogs need it that fast. 1/2000th of a second is also pretty good and should be fast enough for most dogs. Maybe not greyhounds, I don't know. They're pretty quick. I've taken photos of dogs doing agility at 1/1250th of a second, and it has been quite fine. The other setting that for me is really important is that I tend to always have my lens wide open, so that means shooting at f1.8. Yes, this is a little bit trickier because your depth of field or how much of the photo is in focus is quite small, but I like a blurry background, and this is a setting that Chris also recommends. So for me, that is a no-brainer. It also means I'm getting the most amount of light into my lens and my camera, so I can keep my ISO as low as it needs to be. I'm also not concerned about noise because if I'm shooting with a high shutter speed, I'm going to be restricting how much light can come into the lens and the camera, so having a higher ISO is just part of it, and Adobe's Lightroom denoise AI is really pretty good, and at the end of the day, nobody cares about noise if you get a cool photo. There's obviously a lot more to be said about settings. Things like focus settings, I tend to have a wider zone focus area so that I let my camera have a little bit more control than I normally would, because I just really suck at keeping the teeny tiny single point over the eye while a dog is running. Obviously, this is going to depend on your camera, but that is something that I have found works for me. I also tend to use back button focus, so I can just hold my thumb on the button. It'll track and focus whatever's inside my focus area. So as long as the dog stays inside the focus area and I've got my thumb down on back button focus, it's going to be focusing, and then I can just fire off a few photos at the perfect moment. Point number 3 is to try sideways action. If you're really struggling with front on action, dogs running straight toward the camera, maybe you just don't have the gear for it at the moment, you're feeling really despondent and discouraged, try sideways action before you give up on action photos completely. I know it's not the most common type of action photography that you see on social media, but I actually think it has a lot of benefits that aren't really celebrated as much as they should be. For me, I really like sideways action because you can actually see the athleticism of the dog, you can see their shape, their muscles, the length of them, the way their back legs are pushing. You can't see those things on those photos of dogs running toward the camera where they've got their legs out. They don't look long, they don't look powerful. I mean, you have the connection with the camera in that case, but trying sideways action can just give you a different perspective of the dog and show them in a different way. It's also easier for your camera because the focus isn't really changing. If a dog's running toward the camera has to very quickly calculate that closing distance and how to like focus while you're taking photos. There's a lot of stuff going on. Again, just ask Chris. Whereas when they're running sideways to the camera, the distance from the dog to the camera doesn't change. So it's a lot easier for your camera, even if it changes a little bit, it's definitely not as much as this. So it's way easier for your camera to keep that focus while the dog's running to the side than it is for the dog running toward the camera. So if you don't have the gear for it, or you're just wanting to dip your toe into action photography, don't discount sideways action. It can definitely be a way for you to have a higher hit rate and a higher success rate. Tip number 4 is what I was going to talk about before, which is manual timing, or setting situations up where you can kind of be aware of when the perfect moment is going to be. There's a reason that so many photos of dogs running toward the camera have the dog jumping over a log, even when they are very young puppies who definitely shouldn't be jumping over logs. Please, 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 can we stop jumping puppies over logs for photos? I don't care if you only did it once. It could really still damage that puppy's joints, and I also don't necessarily believe that it was only once. Find another way. Use a really tiny stick. If the puppy isn't leaping, that's okay. It's a puppy. Tangent over. The reason that you see so many dogs jumping over logs or sticks is because that is the moment that you can trigger the shutter on your camera. You know, if there's a log there or a small stick or something, that when the dog gets to that point, it's going to go over the stick or the log. Even if it's a reasonably small stick, they're probably still going to step over it in some way. And rather than spraying and praying, so focusing on the dog, taking a whole bunch of photos and hoping that your camera can keep up, especially for my camera even, the first photo tends to be the best one. So what I do is I sit the dog down somewhere, I focus on him with the back button focus, I tell him to run, he runs, I wait for the moment that he's leaping the log, and then I press my shutter button to trigger it at that moment. Then I know that the photo that's in focus isn't going to be the one where he's like on the downstride and he's all like, bleh, because that ain't pretty. We want the one where they're leaping and looking happy. So don't be afraid of waiting for the perfect moment and setting up situations where you can kind of almost guarantee that you know when that perfect moment is going to be. Like I said, I know there's a heap of nuance and a lot more detail that we could go into, but I feel like we've been going for a little while already, and hopefully you've picked up some interesting tips and tricks. Like I said, Chris is coming into Inspawration Photography all throughout 2024. He's going to be doing 6 webinars, so one every 2 months. We're going to be covering action fundamentals in February, sideways running in April, I think. Then we're either going to be doing an equipment masterclass or head-on action, and then the next time we're going to do the other one of those. We want to see where people are at and where the most questions are coming in. We're going to do editing, and we're going to do something else. We haven't decided yet. Again, we're going to see where the most questions and the most interest is coming in, and so the last webinar in December will be kind of built around everything we've been seeing people asking and wondering about and struggling with since the first webinar. Depending on when you're watching this, it's not too late. Even though the first webinar is in February and you're watching this in June and you're like, well, you've already had 2 webinars. That's okay. They're recorded. So if you sign up for all 6 webinars now, you can go back and watch the first ones. Like, they're just sitting there. So if you sign up for all 6, doesn't matter we've done them live, you can still watch them, join the future live ones, and come and ask your questions and stuff there. With all that being said, let's get to Chris's very last, number 1 most important tip. And I know this is going to sound super simple, but it's what he said, and I trust him, and I know exactly what he's talking about. The tip is that you need to focus on repeatability. Set up situations where you can repeat the action, repeat the run, repeat the leap, whatever it is. If you can get the dog, say, running along a path so they can't wildly swerve swerve in different directions, you're going to have a higher chance of getting one of those photos in focus because you know where the dog is going to be going. You kind of have a bit more of an idea of how they behave. By the time you've done it 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you should have a pretty good sense of how that dog moves, how fast they are, when they're going to hit the log or the certain point that you want to be taking the photo. Whether it's a leap, you can be giving directions to the owner to say, okay, yep, can you do this a little bit differently? You can have really dialed your settings in. You can have moved any bits of grass that might be in front of the lens. Repeatability is key, it's king, and it is going to help you get more action photos in focus. Don't forget to like and subscribe, ring the bell, all of that stuff. I know I say this every single time that I come onto YouTube, which is very sporadic, but I have ADHD and it is really hard for me to show up here still. I am trying, but when I do manage to show up, you want to know about it, right? Because I've got the tips, I've got the pet photography stuff, so make sure you're in the know and don't miss out. If you have more questions about action, absolutely let me know in the comments below. There's also 2 blog posts on my blog, and of course the whole webinar series is there to really take you guys from these really simple tips into way more detail, explanation, and really getting you guys set up to take great action photos this year. Of course, if you use these tips and you find them super helpful, make sure you tag me on social media as well. I'm on all the platforms. Just look for Inspawration. I'm all over the place. And I will see you guys in the next YouTube video, whenever that sporadically happens to be.